Okay, let's get started on our notes. We are going to continue with solving equations, but these equations are called literal equations. Literal equations just have lots of different variables on them, and we're going to solve for one of the variables. Solving literal equations is just like solving regular equations. Variables can be moved from one side to the other just like numbers are moved. The only difference is that since numbers aren't being used, there will be little to no simplifying. So you might have more than one variable on the right side. And on the left side, you'll have the variable that you're solving for. Tip, highlight the variable that you're solving for. So if you're solving for h, then you highlight that variable. If you have a highlighter, great. If you don't, you can just box the variable that you're solving for as you go. Any equations that contain more than one variable can be solved for any of the variables. Solving for a variable means to isolate that variable on one side of the equal sign. So isolate means get it all alone. So we are going to solve these four for a particular variable. So it says solve for h. Highlight h. And highlight h in the equation that we're solving. Just like with equations, we're going to draw the line down the equal sign. We're going to solve it. So I've highlighted h. If you don't have a highlighter, then you could put a box around it like that. And that's the variable that you're solving for. So we want to get h by itself. So what you do is you ask yourself, what's keeping h from being by itself? It's the b. Then you ask yourself, well, what operation is that? It's multiply. So remember, to get it to the other side, we have to do the opposite of that. So we're going to divide by b on both sides. On the left side, it's just like numbers, like 3 divided by 3 is 1, and we cancel them out. So b divided by b is 1, so we cancel them out. And we're left with h equals v over b. We can't do anything with v divided by b because they're not numbers. They're letters. They're variables. So we're just going to leave it just like that. You'll recognize that these formulas are geometry formulas. This is volume. This other one is circumference. We're going to solve the circumference one for r. So let's solve for r here. So I've highlighted r. I want to get r by itself. So I ask myself, what is keeping r from being by itself? And it says 2 pi. 2 times pi times r. So everything's being multiplied. So the inverse operation would be to divide. I can divide it by 2 and by pi all in one step. Because if I divide by 2 pi, then they become 1. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. If I have 2 pi divided by 2 pi, then I get 1. So they cancel. So I have C over 2 pi equals R. So I've gotten R by itself. So I'm done. But I've got to write it like mathematicians do, and that's with the variable that I solved for out front. So R equals C over 2 pi. So now I'm done. All I did was flip it around. Okay, let's look at the next one. We're going to solve for B. Highlight B. Draw your line down your equal sign. Okay, we want to get B by itself on this one. So the first thing I want to get rid of is actually the fraction. This is a 1 over 2. So do y'all remember my favorite word? Reciprocal. So reciprocal is when you flip it. To get rid of a fraction in an equation, we do the reciprocal and multiply both sides. So I'm going to multiply everything by the reciprocal. 2 over 1. So the 1/2 times 2 over 1 gives me 1. So 1/2 simplifies out. Then I multiply top times top. Well, the 1 doesn't matter because if I do 1 times 1, I get 1. So this becomes 2a equals BH. So I got rid of the fraction because think about half. How do you make it 1? If I have 2 halves, it's like 50 cents. The way I make it $1 is by doubling it. 50 cents times $1 gives me 1. So that's how I get rid of a fraction like that. Okay, I still need to solve for B, so I'm going to highlight B again. I need to get B by itself. So this is a multiply. So the opposite is divide. H divided by H cancels. And I'm left with 2a over H equals B. But I need to write it like mathematicians. So I'm going to flip it around. Stop. You should be doing this. B equals 2a over H. So that is my final answer. Okay, the last one for literal equations. We're going to solve for W. Draw your line down your equal sign. So it's just like solving for X. We need to move everything around to get X by itself, but in this case it's W. So I don't move this first. I move this 2L first. It's not 21, it's 2 times L, because this formula is perimeter equals 2L plus 2W. We're going to move the 2L by subtracting it. I use a cursive L so it doesn't look like 21. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other.
Why don't you just make the L capitalized?
Yeah, you can. Capital L would be great. P minus 2L. Yeah, that looks good. Equals 2W.
Yours looks better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the last thing is we're still trying to get W by itself. So we look and see what is keeping W from being by itself. The 2. No, just the 2. So this is a multiply. What's the opposite of multiply? So we're going to divide everything by 2 and just leave it like that. I know this kind of doesn't make sense because you're like, we just have letters. It's confusing. I understand that. Just stay with me the best you can. Now I'm going to rewrite with W out front. I'm just rewriting it now and putting a box around my answer. Okay, so these are literal equations. Okay, let's go to the other tab. Close this one. Let's go to solve for y. Shh, stay quiet. Any standard form linear equation with the variables x and y can be solved for y. This first equation is called a standard form. All of this on this other tab, the solve for y tab, you're going to see this throughout the next couple of units. So you're just being introduced to it right now. You're going to see it again and again. This other equation, I bet you've seen this before. Y equals mx plus b. It's called your slope-intercept form. So we are going to solve for y. So I have 2 examples of solving for y.
Which one?
Open up your tab and we got 2 examples. Okay. It is important to be able to manipulate equations because there will be times it's easier to work with an equation written one way instead of the other. For instance, y equals mx plus b can be more useful than ax plus by equals c in certain situations. So we're going to solve for y. Y equals mx plus b is how we want it written, but it's not in that form. So we need to move things around so we can solve it in that form. So let's solve for y. Highlight the y on both equations. Now let's move things around. So you ask yourself, what's keeping y from being by itself? The 6x first. Do the 6x first. It's just like our equation. You move the constant term first, but we're going to move this term. So minus 6x. Whenever you move it, it can cancel, so it's negative 2y equals. The thing is here, y'all pay attention, because we want it to be mx plus b, so I'm going to go ahead and do the 6x first. So negative 6x plus 18. I did the x first because I want it in the form mx plus b, so it's negative 6x plus 18. Now get rid of your negative 2 by dividing both sides by negative 2. Negative 2's cancel here, and I get y equals. I can go ahead and use my calculator to divide these. Negative 6 divided by a negative 2. And that's a 3. So it's 3x. And then 18 divided by negative 2 is minus 9. So all I did was simplify those down. Okay, one more example. We need to move x first. So we're going to subtract 5x on both sides. It'll cancel here, giving us 6y equals. We wanted mx plus b, so let's do the x term first. So it'll be a negative 5x plus 30. Then, once we write that down, now we look and see what's keeping y from being by itself. 6. So what operation is happening between 6 and y? Multiply. So the opposite would be to divide. Yeah. We're going to divide both sides by 6. And when I say both sides, that means every single term. So this term, and this term are going to be divided by 6. Y equals, if I divide these, negative 5 divided by 6, I get a repeating decimal. I don't want that.
Oh my God.
So remember in the calculator, you hit math, fraction, to change it back to a fraction. So it's negative 5 over 6x. And then what's 30 divided by 6? 5. And that's it. So it's negative 5 over 6x plus 5. So you're following the same steps as solving equations. You want to leave it as y equals mx plus b. You're going to glue this in the next page of your journal. If you need to take pictures for you to do your homework, you can.